Okay, here we go. We have our verdict, Savannah. Here we go. Count 1, guilty. Count 2, guilty. Count 3, guilty. Count 4, guilty. Count 5, guilty. Count 6, guilty. Count 7, guilty. Count 8, guilty. Count 9, guilty. Count 10, guilty. Count 11, guilty. Count 12, guilty. Count 13, guilty. Count 14, guilty. Count 15, guilty. Count 16, guilty. Count 17, guilty. Count 18, guilty. Count 19, guilty. Count 20, guilty. Count 21, guilty. Count 22, guilty. Count 23, guilty. I'm pausing because it's coming in. Count 24, guilty. Count 25, guilty. Count 26, guilty. Count 27, guilty. Count 28, guilty. Count 29, guilty. Count 30, guilty. Count 31, guilty. Count 32, guilty. Count 33, guilty. Count 34, guilty. That is 34 felony counts here, all guilty verdicts. Savannah and Lester, back to you.
A total victory for the prosecution here. Laura, the jurors obviously bought the prosecution case in full. There was a consideration of whether or not they might split their verdict or compromise in some way. That is not the case. It's a total rejection of the defendant's case, Donald Trump's case. And we're starting to show you some of the scene outside the courthouse. We could actually hear it, Laura, as you were reading that verdict. And just as you're digesting it, and I know you're keeping your eye on the courtroom as well, what do you make of this verdict?
Savannah, it's a resounding victory for this prosecution in a case that they pitched as something far greater than about hush money. The way they tried to cast this case was about the subversion of democracy, and today the jury agreed with them, Savannah. The former president has tried to cast this as a political prosecution, a political hip job by a Democratic elected DA, by a judge that was biased against him. But these 12 jurors, these 12 New Yorkers, have come to a different conclusion, an independent conclusion, that the former president of the United States is guilty of 34 felony counts. You can hear the crowd here. There's a lot of Trump supporters out here that you can hear are very worked up. As I was reading the verdict, I could hear the crowd emotion growing behind me. I'm only a couple yards away from the area that you can see on your screens right there, sort of the First Amendment area, if you will. It's just a stone's throw away from the press area. It's been growing as the day went on. It's growing after they heard that this verdict was coming in. A lot of emotions running very high in this city right now. Again, this is the presumptive GOP nominee in the middle of an election year for things that he did, that the prosecution said he did to try to corrupt the last election. A just remarkable scene playing out right here in Lower Manhattan.
I want to read, we're getting some color from the courtroom. Tom Witter saying Trump is looking at each juror as they are polled, craning his head at times to look at all the jurors. We're still waiting for kind of a read on what the reaction has been. The former president, of course, has been behind closed doors in a holding room throughout the trial, frankly, but certainly waiting, unable to leave the courthouse and waiting for the verdict. So we're going to get a little more information. Dasha Burns, are you still in the crowd there?
What's your name, sir? Hey, Lester, can you hear me?
Well, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Lester, if you can hear me, there's a lot of passion in this park right now. The former president has alleged a couple of times that because of the police presence here, right, that protesters, demonstrators weren't able to come. They absolutely can, and this crowd is growing here. I've been talking to people who are happy about this verdict, people who are devastated about this verdict. You just saw this man with a passionate plea here. I also just met this gentleman. What's your name, sir?
Jeffrey.
Jeffrey. Jeffrey, what is your reaction as we're all just taking this in right now?
Well, we're watching the legal system work the way it's supposed to work in a democracy. 3 equal branches of government. No one is above the law. He was indicted by a jury of his peers. This was not political. This was not Joe Biden, despite the alt-right rhetoric. It was a grand jury indictment and now a jury conviction of his peers. and this is the legal system working. And this is how America is supposed to work. And I feel very happy for America. I feel very happy for democracy, because this is how it's supposed to work.
Jeffrey, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Lester, Savannah, back to you.
Hallie, I would expect we're going to hear a lot of that, a characterization of this as a fair trial, as a fair judgment of the former president.
Yeah, not from the former president himself, of course, as he has worked for months now to cast this as a political persecution against him. And I think it's worth taking a beat here, right? And recognizing that whether you like this verdict or not, this is an historic moment. This is the former president of the United States and the current presumptive Republican nominee in a razor-close race now coming up in November that has been convicted on these 34 counts in a court of law.
And there's going to be a lot of discussion about the politics. I want to get to Laura Jarrett on a pretty key thing that I'm sure a lot of our viewers are wondering.
Yes.
Will he have to serve any jail time? What is the potential for jail time, and what is the timing of any appeal?
It's a great question, Savannah, and it's something that I have purposely tried not to talk with you about very much during this trial, because he was entitled to a presumption of innocence, and so it seemed premature. That's a different situation now that he has been convicted of 34 felony counts. These are low-level felonies. He does not have any criminal history, which means he hasn't been convicted before, and so the judge will be the one who will determine his sentence in this case. He faces anywhere from just probation to up to 4 years in prison. Now, the fact that he was convicted on all 34 felony counts actually functionally doesn't make any difference, because they were all the same. So it would be as if he was convicted on one for all purposes. In other words, they're not stacked. It's not 4 times 34. It's just 4 max, given what he's facing here. Again, for those low-level felonies, the judge will be the one to sentence him. He will get sort of recommendations from both sides about what an adequate and appropriate sentence would be. He's going to hear from the probation department. All of this, guys, is going to take months and months. This sentence is not going to just happen overnight. The judge actually making it very clear into the jury that their job was not to consider the sentence at all. That had come up in closing arguments. The lead attorney for the president had tried to argue, don't put this man in prison, and the judge interrupted and said, no, disregard that. That's my job. That's not your job. So the judge will be the one who will bring everybody in several weeks to discuss sentencing, a plan for sentencing, and then we'll see where he goes with this. I think one thing to keep in mind here is that this is a person who not only is the former president, but the current presumptive GOP nominee. And again, it's hard to really understate and underscore. I think it's necessary how unusual this is. This is not any other criminal defendant. As much as people have said that, he's not just any other criminal defendant. And the judge is going to have a really tough situation here in sort of balancing all the competing factors, making sure he's paying attention to the case law, making sure he's paying attention to, obviously, to any past precedent that applies to these types of felonies and this type of situation. But this, again, will take weeks and weeks and months. And of course, he's entitled to an appeal. This is not the end of the road for the former president. There is plenty on this record to appeal. There are plenty of legal arguments. It's always hard to challenge a jury verdict, but there are plenty of tricky, complicated legal arguments in this case that the former president can marshal in his favor in terms of doing that appeal. And typically, in this kind of a case, you're going to hear the former president say he gets to stay out of prison while that appeal goes on. So it's not as if he would be behind bars or in custody while that appeal is going on.
Laura, has the judge made many accommodations acknowledging that this A is a former president and B is a presumptive nominee for his party?
Yes, in one big way, Lester. And the biggest way is that he had 10 separate violations of a gag order. He was ordered not to attack witnesses, and the judge found him in contempt of court 10 different times. I say that because any other defendant would have been in a heap of trouble for that. And I'm not trying to discount the fine that he faced for that, but any other defendant would have faced jail time for that. And the judge went on the record many times saying, please don't do this. I don't want to put you in prison, but I may have to if you continue to violate the gag order. Now, we haven't heard much about the gag order, but that gag order is going to be in place while this case continues on, at least through sentencing, and then we'll see where it goes with that. But he's, as of this moment, still under that gag order, Lester.
Well, a couple of notes from the courtroom while we were talking. Not surprisingly, as is customary, the defense has already made a motion for acquittal, arguing that the jury must have relied on Michael Cohen's testimony solely, which was in violation of the jury instructions. That motion already denied by the judge. That's the scene outside as the crowd grows outside the courthouse. I want to turn to Hallie Jackson here. Hallie, you just said it very starkly. Donald Trump, convicted felon candidate for office of the presidency of the United States. What has been so interesting is the X factor is no one really knows how this will play, whether it hurts him in the upcoming presidential election or whether it helps him, because aspects of this have certainly helped him in the primary race.
That's right. It has always been a question mark as to how this would affect him in the general election. We have seen some polling, including some new numbers out today, suggesting that about 2/3 of Americans say even if he were to be convicted, as we now know he has been, it wouldn't change their vote. They would still vote the same way. That said, anywhere from 10 to about 25% of independents suggest that it may make them less likely to vote for the former president. Still, Savannah, a hypothetical is very different from the reality that we now face. Let me point something out here, because people may have this question. Can Donald Trump still run for president even though he's been convicted? He sure can. Yeah. There is nothing in the Constitution that prohibits or precludes him from this, unless the Republican Party were to, for example, come up and say, we don't want you as our nominee anymore. Let me tell you why that's not going to happen, because we are already hearing from the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, the top Republican, of course, in the House of Representatives, calling this essentially a shameful day in American history, describing what he sees as the weaponization of our justice system. Remember, this is somebody who showed up at court while Donald Trump was in trial. And
we just, the judge has just announced a sentencing date. Well, let's go back to Laura for that. What are you hearing?
Yeah, guys, it's interesting. This came up right away, and the prosecution made a suggestion about sentencing, and the defense attorney made a suggestion asking for a sentencing in mid to late July, pointing out that the former president faces other charges in other jurisdictions. Remember, this is just one of 4 different criminal cases, perhaps the only one that will reach a conclusion before Election Day. And the former president's lawyer pointing to that as a reason to sort of put off sentencing for a little while. And the judge announcing sentencing will be on July 11th, guys. July 11th at 10 a.m., the former president will face his sentencing. So again, as I mentioned before, the people, the defense, are now going to put in motions and briefs about what they think the appropriate sentencing will do, and then or what an appropriate sentence would accomplish. And it's interesting. They're not really discussing any of the conditions of release quite yet. I'm gonna wait for more information about that before I delve into that, guys. But for right now, July 11th is sentencing.
And his bail continues, Laura, so he's out of court. He'll be free on bail while pending sentencing.
And I think we just got our first glimpse of
yes.
Mr. Trump from behind the glass, or he darted back behind. But Eric Trump is here. This is again the camera that we have been seeing every day, the arrival and departure and remarks from former President Trump, and we believe he is in this group here, and we would guess, but we don't know for sure whether he'll address the cameras. Here he comes.
Yeah. Mr. Trump, what do you have to say to the American people? Mr. Trump, how does it feel to be convicted of felony? Are you worried about going to jail?
This was a disgrace. This was a rigged trial by a conflicted judge who was corrupt. It's a rigged trial, a disgrace. They wouldn't give us a venue change. We were at 5% or 6% in this district, in this area. This was a rigged, disgraceful trial. But the real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people. And they know what happened here, and everybody knows what happened here. You have a Soros-backed DA and the whole thing. We didn't do a thing wrong. I'm a very innocent man, and it's okay. I'm fighting for our country. I'm fighting for our Constitution. Our whole country is being rigged right now. This was done by the Biden administration in order to wound or hurt an opponent, a political opponent. And I think it's just a disgrace. And we'll keep fighting. We'll fight till the end, and we'll win, because our country's gone to hell. We don't have the same country anymore. We have a divided mess. We're a nation in decline, serious decline. Millions and millions of people pouring into our country right now from prisons and from mental institutions, terrorists, and they're taking over our country. We have a country that's in big trouble, but this was a rigged decision right from day one, with a conflicted judge who should have never been allowed to try this case, never. and we will fight for our Constitution. This is long from over. Thank you very much.
Why should voters vote for a convicted felon?
Taking no questions, the former president now about to leave the courthouse. His remarks very similar to what we've heard during other appearances at the courthouse, and frankly, during appearances at some of the rallies he's been able to fit in around. I have to say, though, the
demeanor grim and angry, and clearly the weight of this is upon him. And he said something so interesting, Hallie. He said the real verdict will come November 5th. And to a certain extent, he is right, because for those who were thinking that there might be some legal resolution that would affect whether or not Donald Trump will ever see the Oval Office again, this case is likely not it. As you just mentioned, you can be a convicted felon and run for president, and you can be a convicted felon and serve as president. So the real verdict in terms of the politics is November 5th. He also said, I just want to say, point of fact, that this was a Biden administration hit job on him. This is a state prosecution. The DA here, Alvin Bragg, is certainly no fan of Mr. Trump, so you can't say there's no politics in it. But this is not a federal Biden administration prosecution.
And in fact, President Biden has gone to notable lengths to distance himself from commenting or reacting to much of the day-to-day about the trial or about the specifics on the legal issues here. You know, you point out, and that caught my ear, too, that the real verdict is in November, because that is going to be former President Trump's rallying cry for the months that we have until this election takes place, because he sees it as an effective way to rally people around him here. It is notable here that he is coming out. I think it's interesting that it was a fairly short statement. This is listen, having covered him in the White House for many years, he understands the power of a television camera upon him and how to react in front of that television camera. He didn't go on for 25 minutes, and he frankly could have in this instance. I just want to note one other thing, too, on this sentencing date, Savannah, as we talk about the politics piece. It is 4 days before the start of the Republican convention, when Donald Trump is expected to officially take the nomination for the Republican Party. And it is also almost certainly going to be right in the middle of an announcement of his vice presidential pick. He has suggested he would do that in early July, probably right before the convention. What a collision of the campaign and the legal problems that he faces.
Well, let me ask Danny a question on that, because let's just say the judge did give him jail time on July 11th. Would he be remanded right then and there to the state prison? And what does that mean in terms of the convention and the campaign?
Well, first of all, the issue of prison is an issue that the Secret Service has been very quiet about how they would handle actually incarcerating a former president and a presidential candidate. And I think that will factor into the judge's decision. I think in all likelihood, you're not looking at a sentence of imprisonment. We may have been over this, but it's Class E felony, nonviolent, age of the offender, no guns, no drugs, not likely to happen here. In most jurisdictions, for example, in federal, you get a turn-in date. You ask for a turn-in date. It actually helps you with your sentence. Here in New York, it's uncertain whether or not the judge would remand him right away, but the odds of him being imprisoned on this Class E felony, which is the lowest level felony for a nonviolent first-time offender of his age, very unlikely.
And Judge Merchan certainly knows that and has seemed to want to bend over backwards to say, I'm not treating this defendant any differently, although Laura Jarrett says his violations of the gag order would have landed probably any typical defendant in much more hot water.
Yes, and something else to consider, too, that his sentence will now actually affect, particularly with his federal cases, his 2 federal criminal cases, it will now affect his criminal history category. So sentencing in federal court, and I'm jumping the gun, assuming that there may be a conviction in his federal cases, is a function of the gravity of the offense and your criminal history category. Now he may have a criminal history.
But real quickly, for those who are just tuning in here, he has been found guilty now in this New York State case. There are 3 other cases pending. One is a state case in Georgia. 2 are federal cases. One regarding efforts to subvert the election in 2020 and January 6th. The other having to do with holding on to classified documents. But generally speaking, it is not expected that any of those cases will proceed to trial before Election Day.
And more than that, there's a strong probability that if any of the 2 federal cases are still pending when he's inaugurated, they will disappear. Either he will appoint an attorney general who is favorable to him, that attorney general will dismiss the cases, and barring that, he may attempt a self-pardon, which may or may not work. We simply don't know.
And if Biden wins, they continue, but he's a private citizen. And we'll see where that leads.
Exactly
right.
Just
a quick legal point. He is not a convicted felon until he's sentenced? Is that...
Technically, yes. Technically, once he is sentenced, he will be a felon. He is technically a felon now, but typically the end of the case, the trial court end of the case, is upon the sentence. Then you file your notice of appeal, and then you are considered a felon during the pendency of that appeal. There are some jurisdictions where, strangely, Massachusetts is one. While your case is on appeal, a very famous Aaron Hernandez, the wide receiver for the Patriots, Dieball's case was on appeal. And under Massachusetts law, that resulted in him not having a criminal history. That is the exception. That is not the norm.
As we talk about the other legal issues that the former president faces, it may be worth getting a gut check on the timing and the timeline here for those three cases, Savannah, that you've laid out. The next one that we're watching the most closely is that federal election interference case, because we are waiting for that critical decision from the Supreme Court at some point, probably by the end of next month, by the end of June, before their term ends, when they will decide on the former president's claim of immunity in that case. There's the Florida federal case on the classified documents that were taken to Mar-a-Lago after the former president's time in the White House. They're going through a whole bunch of pre-trial issues on that one. The next hearing is late July. It really doesn't look like that one is close to beginning at this point, as it is sort of working through the system here. And then there's that state case in Georgia, the Fulton County election interference case. The next hearing in August is on the former president's appeal regarding the prosecutor in that case, Fani Willis, and whether she should be allowed to continue to prosecute the claims against him. So the timeline is stretching, right? I mean, this is the case that I think people thought, if it came, would be resolved prior to the election, and that's exactly what we're seeing here.
Let's bring in someone who worked for Mr. Trump's White House, former White House Deputy Press Secretary Hogan Gidley. Hogan, thank you for being with us. Give me your initial thoughts.
Well, someone I worked with for a long time, actually, on the first impeachment was a man named Alan Dershowitz, who you know very well. And he said one of the things that he was most concerned about in all of these matters with Donald Trump was the venue. Donald Trump alluded to it in his comments there. You hit on some of them where he pointed out the real verdict is going to be on November 5th. Couldn't get a fair trial here. The venue was a problem. He also said this is far from over. I think that's very poignant from the former president, because he understands just what is at stake here. And I know, Savannah, for example, you used to be a reporter there at Court TV. I think you're even an attorney, as I recall. And for the life of me, I can't imagine any other case where you would allow a defendant to stand trial for a month, but no one would tell you what you were accused of until the last part of the closing arguments. The whole thing on its face, in my opinion, is a complete and total joke. Now, what the left has gotten in this verdict is exactly what they wanted. Yes, they wanted to bleed him dry financially. Yes, they wanted to keep him off the campaign trail. And they wanted to be able to call him a convicted felon. This is purely political, and you're going to see that when Joe Biden himself is going to address this from the White House, elevating this and showing some of the rampant politics around these proceedings.
Well, Hogan, just a point of correction there. Of course, the former president knows very well what the charges are against him. They're laid out in a 34-count indictment. But I think what you're referring to, which is a fair point, is that some of those underlying crimes that are sort of the girding and the foundation of those charges, which are clearly delineated, those were not really delineated until the final hour in closing argument. So I understand what you're saying. I just want to make sure that we're clear about that.
And how do you mount a defense if you don't know those things? Those are key to the case.
Well, there were aspects of it that came out through the trial. So, yes, and by the way, the defense did respond to them in the trial.
Just want to note, as we talk about what is happening politically here, and as Hogan has brought up, for example, President Biden, in just the last minute, he has tweeted from his campaign account that there's only one way to keep Donald Trump out of the Oval Office: at the ballot box. Now, not specifically referencing the verdict, not specifically referencing the convictions here for the former president, but interesting, Savannah and Lester, both Donald Trump and Joe Biden are saying it all comes down to November. On that, these two agree on that point.
Well, there's no question. And I think there were partisans, people who are obviously not fans of the former president, who were hoping there would be a legal resolution to what they perceive as a political problem. That, in all likelihood, is not going to happen, although we will see whether or not the Judge Marchand sees fit to give him jail time and how that might affect anything. But again, I mean, it's as extraordinary as it is. Our Constitution has very few requirements in terms of eligibility to be president. You got to be 35 years old. You have to have lived in this country for 10 years, and you have to be a natural born citizen. And why? The founders didn't want to put a list of requirements. They wanted the voters to decide. They wanted the voters to say, this is unacceptable for us, for a president, and this is fine. And that is essentially what will happen in this election in November.
What we're seeing, too, from the Biden campaign is this pivot to a degree, or at least a shift towards what a senior campaign official had told me just within the last 72 hours that they had wanted to do. Once this trial ends, remind people that this is in their view, a very stark and clear choice between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And you're seeing that in this statement that is just in now from the Biden-Harris campaign through a spokesperson. It is not from the president or the vice president, saying that today's verdict does not change the fact that the American people face a simple reality. There is still only one way to keep Donald Trump out of the Oval Office, at the ballot box. It also says that Donald Trump has always, again, from the Biden campaign, mistakenly believed he would never face consequences for breaking the law for his own personal gain. So obviously, the legal issues fold into what the Biden campaign will press as a character case against the former president. And the former president will use his legal issues, not just this one, but the other ones as well, to try to make the case that he is the one who is a victim.
Well, that's what's interesting about what Hogan Gidley said. Fair point. He feels the left and the President Biden are going to use this politically. Perhaps they will, but certainly Donald Trump has used it politically to his advantage, I might add.
He raised $360,000, as far as we can tell, from small donors on day one of this trial alone, Savannah, based on the fundraising appeals. And he's got another one out tonight from the campaign. I'm just going to pull it up briefly here, where he calls himself, or the campaign calls him, a political prisoner. It's him with a raised fist here. I mean, it's begun already.
Let's go to Kelly O'Donnell, NBC senior White House correspondent. Kelly, at the White House right now. We know the president in recent weeks has been a little more willing to take jabs and mock Mr. Trump. We saw the tweet, or the X, if you will. Do we expect the president to make remarks about healing, about the court system, about all the things surrounding this?
In time, that is likely, Lester, but it is just a strange moment of timing that today is the 9th anniversary of the death of Beau Biden, the president's son. He is away in Rehoboth with family, marking that day. And the guidance we have had is there are no immediate plans for the president to speak on this issue. There is an expectation that the White House, in the official role, separate from the campaign, would emphasize the importance of respecting the rule of law. And inevitably, the president will be asked about the verdicts and what this will mean for the election and what it means for the country and the historical perspective in the days ahead. But right now, he is with family at their home in Delaware and focused on the loss they suffered 9 years ago. So the sort of strange twist of history, that was such a pivotal moment, the death of his son, in encouraging him to run for office in 2020. And then on the anniversary of Beau Biden's death, to have a verdict in the New York trials of Donald Trump is just one of those strange coincidences that brings so much of this into focus about the larger context. So we expect that the White House will ultimately support the rule of law, support the jury's verdict. At the moment, it is the campaign that is speaking in terms of how they are responding, and again, pointing to November and the choice that Americans need to make. They have a couple of paragraphs in a statement that Hallie alluded to, talking about how this is a choice for the American people.
Kelly, let us just jump in here for a second, because I want to get outside to the courthouse. Tom Winter is our NBC News producer who was inside the courtroom as that verdict was read, and he joins us now along with our correspondent, Laura Jarrett. Tom, there is nothing like the tension in a courtroom right before a verdict is read. Tell us what it was like in there, whether the jurors looked at the former president, and any other color you can provide from the courtroom.
Sure. Well, it was really a 180 in what occurred in there, because the judge brought us in. First off, the prosecution just showed up. We did not hear the bell. It's a 1960s rotary style bell that we typically hear when the jury has something to tell the court. That's what we've been hearing over the past day or so. The prosecution comes in. All of a sudden, Donald Trump and his team come in, and the judge says, look, it's my intention here to let the jury go at 4:30. And all 4:30 comes and goes, and we're about 5 or 6 minutes past that. He comes in. He says, well, we received a note from the jury at 4:20 saying they have reached a verdict, and they want about 30 minutes or so more to be able to go through the paperwork and go count by count and item by item. At that point, the mood in the court completely changed. You could even hear the air conditioning system in there over just a couple of keyboard strokes from reporters that were in the courtroom. Obviously, the tension built. Prior to that, the former president and his defense attorney were talking as if the day was over. They were laughing with each other, covering their mouths out so that the cameras that are viewed in the overflow courtroom weren't seen. And so the focus was just kind of the day is done. And immediately the gravity of the moment struck everybody in the courtroom, prosecution and defense. And you saw a real change at the defense table, understanding that this was really it. To your point, Savannah, I noticed the jurors, and I did not see all of them coming in because of just the way that the courtroom was set up, but I did not see any of them make any eye contact with Donald Trump prior to the verdict being read. I did not see them make any eye contact with the prosecution either. At that point, the judge asked the jury foreperson, have you reached a verdict without telling me? He said yes. He stood. They handed him a handheld mic, which allowed all of us to hear what he was going to say. And then one of the courtroom staff members went count by count. All those 34 counts, which as you well know by now, were all guilty. There was not a ton of reaction within the courtroom. We had been strongly admonished by the court security officers. They didn't want any sort of outbursts of any type. Once the jury was polled, which as you know is the moment where the judge or the court asks each individual juror if what the foreperson read was accurate. They said yes. And then at that point they were let out, and there did not appear to be any sort of significant eye contact there either. And there were some jurors that, of course, over the course of a trial, as you know, are more animated than others. Some take more notes than others. But even those that were a little bit more animated, I didn't detect any sort of kind of a telling of what the verdict would be prior to it being read. So obviously a kind of a quick turn of events, putting all of this in perspective. For years, going back to September 2019, when the Manhattan District Attorney's Office asked for Donald Trump's tax records, asked for his financial documents, the two Supreme Court battles that followed all throughout the pandemic up until the point when they got those documents, at that point there, Savannah, this case kind of moved forward slowly because there was a bit of a change here at the office. There was an election. There was a different district attorney, as you know, that came in and took office. And the plan of attack, if you will, for this investigation and case changed after that point. And eventually we got the charges that we got today, and approximately a year later, well, here we are now talking about a verdict. Where does this go from here has been so often the question involving investigations surrounding Donald Trump for the past 6-7 years or so. Today, this is kind of a big moment because we have no indication whatsoever that there is now going to be any sort of ongoing criminal jeopardy for the former president and presumptive Republican nominee going forward. None from the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, no indication that they're doing any additional work, no indication that the federal prosecutors about 2 blocks from me and the FBI 2 blocks from me is doing anything involving any sort of investigation involving the former president as it pertains or has a nexus to New York. Obviously, there's the other cases that you well know about. So it's a big moment today, a bit of a period on a number of investigations going back to the Michael Cohen guilty plea in federal court that surrounded all the conduct in this case. And so now we'll just have to see where those other 2 cases go. But as far as things go from here in his hometown, where so much of these investigations originated from or involved, including the conviction and jailing of his chief financial officer, Alan Weisselberg, and the conviction of his company, it's over.
All right,
so
Tom, on that note, let me ask you.
Obviously, those guilty pleas.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.